I am Cassandra, 28 years old, and this morning I received a text message that shattered my world all over again. My cousin Jessica finally admitted the truth after 6 years of family exile. The screen illuminated with 3 words I never thought I would see. You were right. One text. 6 years too late. All because I saw something at her wedding that I should have kept to myself. Something that cost me my entire family. Tracing the notification with my finger, I felt the old wound reopen. Truer words were never spoken. Blood is thicker than water until it is not. Before I dive into this heartbreaking story, let me know in the comments what you would do if your entire family turned against you over a lie. And do not forget to like and subscribe to hear more stories about family betrayal and healing. Before everything fell apart, my family was my anchor. We were the kind of close-knit family that others envied. Sunday dinners at my parents' house were mandatory, not because anyone forced us, but because none of us would dream of missing them. Mom would cook these elaborate meals while Dad entertained us with his corny jokes that somehow never got old. My younger sister Elizabeth and I would help set the table, gossiping about our week and playfully bickering like sisters do. Extended family gatherings were even more special. Thanksgiving was always at Grandma Jones' house with all 15 cousins crammed around tables of various heights and sizes. Christmas rotated between houses, but was always a 2-day affair with gift exchanges and an epic snowball fight regardless of how much snow was actually on the ground. Among all my cousins, Jessica and I had always been the closest. Only 13 months apart in age, we were more like sisters than cousins. We shared clothes, secrets, and dreams. We were roommates in college for 2 years before I moved in with my then-boyfriend. Even after that, we had weekly coffee dates where we would share everything happening in our lives. Jessica was the first person I called when I got a promotion, when I was sad, or when I needed advice. At 28, I had a stable job as an interior designer at a prestigious firm in Boston. I loved transforming spaces and helping clients create homes that reflected who they were. I had been dating Adam for 3 years, and things were serious. He was a software engineer, smart and kind, if a bit conflict-averse. We had moved in together the previous year, and though we had not explicitly discussed marriage, it felt like we were heading in that direction. When Jessica got engaged to Michael after a whirlwind 8-month romance, I was genuinely happy for her, despite some reservations about the speed of their relationship. Jessica asked me to be her maid of honor, and I accepted without hesitation. I threw myself into the role, organizing a beautiful bachelorette weekend in Cape Cod, helping her choose the perfect dress, and spending countless hours addressing invitations and assembling welcome bags. As the wedding approached, I imagined how perfect it would be. Jessica and I had always talked about being in each other's weddings. I pictured the beautiful photos we would take together, the heartfelt toast I would give, and the memories we would create. I even allowed myself to imagine that Adam might be inspired to propose after seeing how beautiful the ceremony was. But there was something about Michael that made me uneasy. I could not quite put my finger on it, but something felt off. He was charming, successful, and handsome, everything Jessica had always said she wanted. But sometimes I caught glimpses of a different person when he thought no one was watching. The way his smile would drop immediately after turning away from someone. The cold calculation in his eyes when observing a room. The slightly too tight grip on Jessica's arm when guiding her through a crowd. Then there were the incidents. Small things that could be explained away but added up to something unsettling. Like the time I stopped by their apartment unexpectedly to drop off some wedding samples and heard him on the phone, his voice low and intimate, only to hang up abruptly when he realized I was there. He claimed it was a work call, but it was 11 p.m. on a Saturday. Or the time at their engagement party when I went to get my coat from the bedroom and found him sitting very close to one of Jessica's bridesmaids, Tiffany. They jumped apart when I entered, and Michael made a joke about Tiffany helping him plan a surprise for Jessica. But Tiffany could not look me in the eye for the rest of the night. I wrestled with whether to say anything to Jessica. These were just suspicions after all. No concrete evidence. And Jessica was so happy, so in love. Who was I to ruin that? Besides, confronting her about Michael would put her in a terrible position. If she chose not to believe me, it would create a rift between us. And if she did believe me but stayed with him anyway, that would be even worse. So I kept my concerns to myself, hoping I was wrong, hoping Michael would prove me wrong. As the wedding day approached, I pushed my doubts aside and focused on being the supportive maid of honor Jessica deserved. I wanted her day to be perfect. I just had no idea that it would end up being the day that would destroy my relationship with my entire family. The morning of Jessica's wedding dawned bright and clear, a perfect June day. The bridal party gathered in a suite at the Four Seasons Hotel Boston, where hairstylists and makeup artists transformed us one by one. Jessica was radiant, practically floating with happiness as she sipped champagne and laughed with her bridesmaids. I had never seen her look so beautiful. "Can you believe I'm getting married today?" she squealed, grabbing my hands. "In just a few hours, it'll be Mrs. Michael Thornton." I forced a smile, pushing away the nagging doubts that had kept me awake most of the night. "You look absolutely stunning, Jess. Michael is a lucky man." The morning progressed in a whirlwind of activity. After our hair and makeup were done, we helped Jessica into her gown, a stunning mermaid-style dress with intricate lace detailing. The photographer captured everything, directing us through a series of poses, some serious, some silly. It was during one of these photo sessions that I realized we were missing Jessica's special garter, the something blue her grandmother had given her. "I'll go grab it from the other room," I offered, slipping out of the suite and down the hall to the smaller room where we had stored some of our belongings. The door was slightly ajar when I reached it. I pushed it open and froze at the threshold. There against the far wall was Michael, his arms wrapped around a woman I recognized as one of the hotel event coordinators. They were locked in a passionate kiss, his hand sliding up her thigh, bunching her skirt. For a moment, I stood there in shock, unable to process what I was seeing. Then the woman opened her eyes and saw me. She pushed Michael away and smoothed her skirt, her face flushing with guilt. I was just checking on the reception details," she stammered, then rushed past me out of the room. Michael straightened his tie, his expression shifting rapidly from surprise to anger to a calculated calm. "Cassandra," he said smoothly, "this isn't what it looks like." "Really?" My voice was barely above a whisper. "Because it looks like you were kissing someone who isn't Jessica on your wedding day." He took a step toward me, his charming smile sliding back into place. "You know how these things can be misinterpreted. She was upset about a personal issue and I was comforting her. That's all." By sticking your tongue down her throat, I could feel anger replacing my initial shock. "Do you think I'm stupid, Michael?" His expression hardened. "What I think is that you should be very careful about what you say next. No one would believe you anyway. It's my word against yours, and everyone knows how close you and Jessica are. They might think you're jealous, trying to sabotage her happiness." The threat in his words was unmistakable. I felt sick to my stomach. "You don't deserve her." "Maybe not," he shrugged, "but I'm who she wants. Don't ruin this for her, Cassandra. If you care about her at all, you'll forget what you think you saw." I stormed out of the room, my mind racing. What should I do? The ceremony was scheduled to start in less than an hour. If I told Jessica now, would she even believe me? And if she did, it would devastate her. But how could I let her marry a man who was already cheating on her literally hours before they exchanged vows? After agonizing for 20 minutes, I made my decision. I had to tell her. I found her alone in the bridal suite, taking a moment of quiet before the ceremony. "Jess, I need to talk to you," I said, my voice shaking. "It's important." "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." Her face was full of concern. I took a deep breath. I saw Michael kissing the event coordinator, just now in the storage room. Her expression froze, then slowly morphed into disbelief. "What are you talking about?" "I'm so sorry, Jess. I went to get your grandmother's garter and I saw them. They were. It wasn't innocent." She stared at me for a long moment, then let out a short, incredulous laugh. "That's not possible. Michael would never do that." "I know it's hard to hear, but I saw them with my own eyes. He tried to tell me I misinterpreted what I saw, but Jess, there was no misinterpreting it." Her face hardened, a coldness entering her eyes that had never seemed directed at me before. "I can't believe you're doing this. Today of all days." "Jess, No," she cut me off. I know what this is about. You've always been jealous that I found someone before you did. Adam still hasn't proposed right, so you can't stand to see me happy." Her words stung like a physical slap. "That's not true. I'm telling you this because I love you, because you're my best friend, and I don't want to see you hurt. If you loved me, you wouldn't try to ruin the most important day of my life with lies." Her voice had risen to a shout. "Get out. I don't want you in my wedding anymore." The door burst open, and my Aunt Eleanor Jessica's mother rushed in. "What's going on? I can hear you down the hall." "Ask her, Jessica," spat, pointing at me. "Ask her what she's trying to do to my wedding." Aunt Eleanor turned to me, confusion etched on her face. I tried to explain, but the words sounded hollow even to my own ears. How could I explain what I'd seen without sounding like I was trying to sabotage the wedding? Before I could finish, Michael appeared in the doorway, concern perfectly arranged on his face. "Is everything okay?" I heard shouting. Jessica ran to him, collapsing into his arms. "Cassandra is trying to convince me that she saw you kissing someone else. Tell her she's wrong. Tell her." Michael looked at me with just the right amount of shock and hurt in his eyes. "What? That's insane. Why would you say something like that?" The room fell silent as all eyes turned to me. I could feel the weight of their judgment, their disbelief. And then Michael delivered the final blow. "Unless," he hesitated as if reluctant to continue, "unless this is about what happened earlier, when you tried to. When you suggested that you and I should?" What I gasped. "That's a lie." But it was too late. The seed was planted. Jessica pulled away from Michael, her eyes wide. "What are you saying?" Michael sighed, the picture of regret. "I didn't want to say anything, especially today. But Cassandra cornered me earlier. She suggested that we should be together instead. That she was the better choice. When I rejected her, she got angry. I never thought she'd go this far, though." "That's not true." I was practically screaming now. "Hez lying, I would never do that." But I could see in their faces that they believed him. Why wouldn't they? Michael was the perfect gentleman, the devoted fiancé. And who was I? Just the jealous single cousin. The news spread through the wedding party like wildfire. By the time the ceremony began, everyone knew the story. Cassandra had tried to seduce the groom and, when rejected, tried to sabotage the wedding with false accusations. I was removed from the bridal party, but was told I could still attend the ceremony for appearance's sake. I sat in the back row, isolated and humiliated, watching Jessica marry a man I knew would break her heart. Throughout the reception, I endured cold stares and whispered comments. My parents could barely look at me, embarrassed by what they believed I had done. My sister Elizabeth, always my ally now, stood firmly on Jessica's side. I tried repeatedly to tell my side of the story, but no one wanted to hear it. They had already decided I was guilty. I left the reception early, unable to bear the weight of their judgment any longer. As I slipped out, I caught one last glimpse of Jessica and Michael sharing their first dance. She looked so happy, so in love. And he looked directly at me, a small, triumphant smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He had won, and I had lost everything. The days following the wedding were a blur of angry texts, voicemails, and social media posts. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from family members expressing their disappointment, disgust, and disbelief at what I had supposedly done. "How could you do this to Jessica?" my Aunt Eleanor wrote. "She trusted you. We all trusted you." "I always knew there was something wrong with you," my cousin Tyler messaged. "Stay away from our family." Even distant relatives I barely knew joined in condemning me based on rumors and second-hand accounts. It seemed the story had grown with each retelling. By the end of the week, according to family gossip, I had not just tried to seduce Michael, but had been carrying on an affair with him for months. Had shown up to the wedding drunk and had tried to physically attack Jessica when she confronted me. The worst came from my own parents. 3 days after the wedding, they called and demanded I come over to discuss the situation. When I arrived, they sat me down like a misbehaving child. "We raised you better than this," my father said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "How could you embarrass us like this? The entire family is talking about it." "Dad, please, you have to believe me," I pleaded. "Michael is lying. I saw him kissing someone else, and when I told Jessica, he turned it around on me." My mother shook her head. "Jessica has known Michael for almost a year. She's in love with him. Why would he risk everything just hours before their wedding? It doesn't make sense, Cassandra." "Because he's a cheater. That's what cheaters do," I was practically shouting now. "Lower your voice," my father warned. "The neighbors will hear." "I don't care who hears him telling the truth." My mother reached across the table and took my hand. Her voice softened, which somehow made what came next even worse. "Honey, we think you need help. This behavior, it's not like you. Maybe you're going through something, jealousy or depression. Dr. Mendez has an opening next week. He'd be willing to see you." I pulled my hand away, stunned. "You think I'm mentally ill because I won't admit to a lie, because I won't confess to something I didn't do. We think you're not well because you tried to ruin your cousin's wedding," my father said firmly, "and you refuse to acknowledge it or apologize." "I won't apologize for telling the truth." My father stood up, his patience clearly at an end. "Then I don't think there's anything else to discuss. Until you're ready to admit what you did and make amends, I think it's best if you give the family some space." "Space," I echoed. "What does that mean?" "It means," my mother said gently, "that perhaps you should skip family gatherings for a while, just until things settle down." I left their house in tears, unable to believe my own parents were choosing to believe a stranger over their daughter. But that was just the beginning. As the weeks passed, the isolation grew more complete. I was uninvited from my nephew's birthday party. When I showed up anyway with a gift, my sister Elizabeth met me at the door and asked me to leave. "Not today, Cass," she said. "The family is here." "I'm family too," I reminded her, fighting back tears. "You know what I mean," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Jessica and Michael are here. It would be uncomfortable for everyone." The final blow came when my grandmother called to tell me it would be better for everyone if I didn't attend Thanksgiving that year. "But we've never missed a family Thanksgiving," I protested. "Not once in 28 years. "There's a first time for everything, dear," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Give it time. By Christmas, perhaps things will have settled down." But Christmas came and went without an invitation. I spent it alone in my apartment, watching holiday movies and trying not to think about my family gathered at my parents' house without me. I sent gifts, most of which went unacknowledged. My parents sent a stiff card and a gift certificate. My sister sent nothing. Through it all, Adam tried to be supportive, but I could tell the situation made him uncomfortable. He was conflict-averse by nature, and the idea of being caught in a family feud terrified him. As the months dragged on, and it became clear that the rift wasn't healing, he began to pull away. "Maybe you should just apologize," he suggested one night after I had spent an hour crying over missing my niece's dance recital. "Even if you didn't do it, just to make peace." Apologize for something I didn't do, lie about trying to seduce my cousin's husband. How could I ever look at myself in the mirror again? He didn't have an answer for that. 2 weeks later, he moved out, claiming we had grown apart. I knew the real reason: he couldn't handle the drama, the constant cloud of family conflict that hung over our relationship. Depression settled over me like a heavy blanket. I began missing work, calling in sick when I couldn't summon the energy to get out of bed. My performance suffered, and my boss called me in for a talk about my future at the company. I started seeing a therapist, not because I thought I was wrong, but because I needed anyone to talk to who didn't think I was a homewrecker and a liar. The most painful part was seeing Instagram posts of family gatherings I wasn't invited to. Birthdays, barbecues, holiday celebrations, all happening without me. In some photos, Michael was front and center, his arm around Jessica, playing the perfect husband and new family member. The man who had taken my place while spreading lies that cost me everything. I tried reaching out to Elizabeth several times. Of all people, I thought my sister would eventually come around. We had been inseparable growing up, sharing a room until I left for college, whispering secrets late into the night. But each attempt was met with brief, non-committal responses that made it clear she wasn't interested in mending our relationship. "I can't be caught in the middle, Cass," she texted, after I asked to meet for coffee. "It's too complicated." There's no middle, I responded. Either you believe me or you don't. She never answered. The first Thanksgiving without my family was the hardest. I had always loved the holiday, the chaos of too many people in Grandma's house, the familiar dishes everyone contributed year after year, the post-dinner walk to the park where we'd inevitably end up playing touch football despite being stuffed with turkey and pie. Instead, I bought a small turkey breast and attempted to make some of the traditional dishes for myself. The stuffing was too dry, the cranberry sauce too tart. I ate at my small dining table trying to ignore the emptiness of my apartment, the silence where there should have been laughter and conversation. After dinner, I opened a bottle of wine and drank most of it while watching the Macy's parade I'd recorded that morning. By the time Christmas rolled around, I was better prepared for the solitude. I decorated my apartment, bought myself presents to unwrap, and accepted an invitation from a coworker to join her family's celebration. It wasn't the same, but it was better than being alone. As the months turned into a year and then two, I realized that this wasn't a temporary rift. My family had chosen their side and it wasn't mine. The pain didn't go away, but it changed, transformed from a sharp, constant agony to a dull ache that flared up at certain triggers. Holidays, birthdays, random memories that would ambush me when I least expected it. I learned to live with it, to build a life around the hole where my family used to be. After 2 years of struggling in Boston, surrounded by memories and the constant possibility of running into family members, I made the decision to move across the country to San Francisco. I needed a fresh start somewhere, without the ghosts of my past life haunting every corner. Finding a job was harder than I'd anticipated. The economy was tight, and interior design positions were competitive. I spent 3 months sending out resumes and portfolios before finally landing an interview with a small but growing firm specializing in sustainable design. The salary was less than I'd made in Boston, but the opportunity was promising and, more importantly, it was 3,000 miles away from my past. My new apartment was tiny by Boston standards, a one-bedroom walk-up in a vibrant neighborhood filled with young professionals and artists. The rent ate up nearly half my monthly income, but I didn't care. It was mine, a space where I could rebuild, without the weight of family judgment pressing down on me. The first few months were lonely. I worked long hours trying to prove myself at the new firm, and spent evenings exploring my neighborhood or binge-watching shows on Netflix. I missed having friends, having people who knew me, who understood my humor and my history. But I was also afraid to let new people in. What if they too believed the worst about me when they heard my story? That changed when I reluctantly attended a mixer for new residents in my apartment building. I almost didn't go, but after a particularly lonely weekend, I forced myself to put on a nice outfit and at least make an appearance. That's where I met Stephanie, a graphic designer WAD, moved from Chicago 6 months earlier. "God, isn't it terrifying?" she said after WED, exchanged the usual pleasantries about jobs and apartments. "Moving to a new city where you don't know anyone. I keep telling myself it's an adventure, but most days it just feels lonely as hell." Her honesty was refreshing, and I found myself opening up to her in a way I hadn't to anyone in years. We ended up closing down the mixer, then continuing our conversation at a nearby bar until well past midnight. By the end of the evening, I'd made my first real friend in San Francisco. Through Stephanie, I met Marcus, a software engineer with a passion for rock climbing, and Alicia, a kindergarten teacher with the most infectious laugh I'd ever heard. The 4 of us began meeting regularly for dinner movies or hikes outside the city. They became my chosen family, the people I called when I had good news or bad, the ones who showed up with soup when I was sick or champagne when I got a promotion. 6 months after moving, I finally worked up the courage to see a therapist again. Dr. Lynn was different from the therapist I'd seen in Boston. She didn't try to fix me or suggest that I must have misremembered what happened at the wedding. Instead, she helped me process the trauma of being disbelieved and abandoned by my entire family. "What your family did was a form of gaslighting," she explained during one session. "They made you question your own reality, your own memories. It's no wonder you've had trouble trusting people since then." With Dr. Lynn's guidance, I began to work through my anger and hurt. I started keeping a journal, pouring out all the things I wished I could say to my family. The exercise was cathartic, helping me organize thoughts that had been swirling chaotically in my head for years. One evening, after a particularly emotional therapy session, I decided to turn my journal entries into a blog. I called it Exiled Life After Family Abandonment, and shared my first post, a carefully anonymized version of what had happened at Jessica's wedding. I didn't expect anyone to read it. It was just another way to process my feelings. To my surprise, the post received comments from others who had experienced similar situations, family estrangements, being disbelieved when reporting misconduct, the pain of watching loved ones believe lies. I began posting regularly, sharing my journey of healing and connecting with others who had been through similar experiences. The blog grew, attracting readers from around the country and even internationally. I received emails from people thanking me for putting into words what they had experienced. Some shared their own stories, equally heartbreaking tales of family betrayal and isolation. I started a private Facebook group for blog readers to connect with each other, creating a community of support for those who had been cut off from their families. As my online community grew, so did my confidence. I was no longer the pariah, the family embarrassment. I was someone who helped others, who turned her pain into something meaningful. My design career was thriving too. I was given more responsibility at the firm, even leading some client projects on my own. It was at a client meeting that I met David. He was an architect working on the same commercial redevelopment project, and we were paired to collaborate on the interior spaces. He was thoughtful and creative, with a quiet confidence that I found immediately attractive. After several professional interactions, he asked me to dinner. I hesitated. After Adam, I hadn't dated much. A few casual dinners that went nowhere, but nothing serious. I was afraid to let someone get close enough to hurt me again. But there was something about David that made me want to take the risk. Our first date lasted 5 hours. We started with dinner, then moved to a jazz club, and ended up walking along the waterfront until well past midnight, talking about everything from our favorite books to our most embarrassing childhood memories. By the end of the night, I knew this was different from any relationship I'd had before. As we continued dating, I worried about when and how to tell him about my family's situation. Would he think I was damaged goods? Would he wonder what I'd really done to deserve such complete rejection? Finally, after we'd been seeing each other for 2 months, I worked up the courage to share my story. We were at his apartment cooking dinner together when I broached the subject. "There's something I need to tell you about my family." I began, my heart racing. "It's complicated." He put down the knife he was using to chop vegetables and gave me his full attention. Listening. I told him everything from the moment I saw Michael kissing the event coordinator to the last unanswered text I'd sent my sister. I showed him the blog, explained how it had become a lifeline for me and others. Throughout my story, he listened without interrupting, his expression serious and thoughtful. When I finished, I held my breath, waiting for his reaction. Would he suggest, as Adam had, that I should just apologize to make peace? Would he question my memory of what I'd seen? Instead, he took my hand and said simply, "I believe you." 3 words. 3 words that I hadn't heard from anyone who mattered in 4 years. I burst into tears, overwhelmed by the relief of being believed, of not having to defend my reality. David pulled me into his arms and held me while I cried. "Your family failed you," he said when my tears subsided. "They should have trusted you, supported you, at least given you the benefit of the doubt. I'm so sorry you went through that alone." In that moment, I fell in love with him. Not just because he believed me, but because he understood the magnitude of what I'd lost, and didn't try to minimize it or fix it with platitudes. As our relationship deepened, David became my rock. He understood when certain holidays were difficult for me, never pushed me to reach out to my family if I wasn't ready, and supported my work with the blog and online community. He introduced me to his family, who welcomed me warmly, including me in their traditions and gatherings. Still, there were moments when the loss of my own family hit me hard. David's sister's wedding brought back painful memories of Jessica's wedding and all that followed. Seeing David interact with his parents reminded me of the relationship I'd once had with my own. And sometimes randomly, it'd be struck by the realization that my family was continuing their lives without me, perhaps barely thinking of me at all. But I was building a new life, creating new traditions. Thanksgiving with Stephanie, Marcus, and Alicia became an annual event, each of us contributing dishes from our family recipes. Christmas Eve was spent with David's family, Christmas Day with my friends. We celebrated birthdays, promotions, and small victories, building a tapestry of shared experiences and memories. 5 years after the wedding that had cost me everything, I was finally happy again. Different, scarred, but happy. I had a career I loved, friends who were like family, a partner who believed in me, and a community of people I'd helped through my blog. I had rebuilt my life from the ashes of what was destroyed that day. And then, out of the blue, the text message came that would force me to confront the past I'd worked so hard to leave behind. The text arrived on a Tuesday morning as I was getting ready for work. My phone buzzed with a notification, and when I glanced at it, I nearly dropped the device. Jessica, after 6 years of silence, my cousin had sent me a message. You were right. Can we talk? 4 words that made my hands shake and my heart race. I sat down on the edge of my bed, staring at the screen, unsure how to respond, or even if I should. Before I could decide, another message came through. I know you probably hate me and you have every right to. But please, Cassandra, I need to talk to you. I showed the messages to David over breakfast. What do you think she wants? I asked, pushing my untouched oatmeal around the bowl. There's only one way to find out, he replied. But you don't owe her a response, Cass. You don't owe her anything. After he left for work, I sat with my phone composing and deleting responses. Part of me wanted to ignore the messages, to give Jessica a taste of the silence it endured for 6 years. Another part was curious, desperate to know what had finally made her reach out, what "you were right" meant exactly. Finally, I typed, "What do you mean I was right?" Her response came immediately, as if she'd been waiting with her phone in hand. About Michael. Everything you said at the wedding was true. He was cheating then, and he never stopped. I'm so sorry I didn't believe you. A strange mix of emotions washed over me. Vindication, anger, sadness, and a tiny, unwelcome flicker of sympathy for Jessica. I quashed the last one quickly. Whatever was happening in her life now, she had made her choice 6 years ago. She had chosen to believe Michael over me, and she had participated in turning my entire family against me. Why are you telling me this now? I wrote back. Because I've left him, finally, and because I owe you the truth. Everyone does. She asked if we could meet in person, suggesting she could fly to San Francisco the following weekend. The idea of seeing her face to face after all this time was overwhelming. What would I say to her? How would I feel? Would seeing her reopen wounds that had finally started to heal? I told her I needed time to think about it and ended the conversation. All day at work, I was distracted, unable to focus on the client presentation I was supposed to be preparing. When I got home, I found a much longer email from Jessica waiting for me. I don't know where to begin, she wrote. I'm so ashamed of what I did to you, of what I let Michael do to you. You were trying to protect me, and I punished you for it. She went on to explain that her marriage had been troubled almost from the start. Within months of the wedding, she'd found evidence that Michael was cheating text messages from women she didn't know. When confronted, Head denied everything, convincing her she was paranoid and insecure. This pattern had continued for years, with Michael gaslighting her whenever she questioned him. I should have remembered how Head lied about you, she wrote. That should have been my first clue about who he really was. The final straw had come 3 weeks earlier, when Shed discovered that Michael had not only been having an affair with a coworker for over 2 years, but that they had a 10-month-old daughter together. The betrayal was so complete, so undeniable, that Shed finally found the strength to leave. Once I was out from under his influence, I started remembering everything differently, she continued, including what happened with you at the wedding. I realized that your story made perfect sense. Why would you make something like that up? You loved me. You were trying to save me from exactly what ended up happening. She ended the email by telling me she'd shared the truth with my parents, my sister, and other key family members. They know now that you were telling the truth all along. Everyone feels terrible about how you've been treated. They want to make amends if you'll let them." I sat at my computer, tears streaming down my face as 6 years of pain and vindication crashed over me like a wave. All this time, I'd told myself that the truth would eventually come out, that one day my family would realize I'd been right. Now that day had come and I had no idea how to feel about it. That night, I received calls and texts from family members I'd not spoken to in years. My mother left a voicemail, her voice breaking as she begged me to call her back. My father sent an email, formal and stiff, but containing the words, "I was wrong and am sorry." My sister Elizabeth called 5 times in a row until I finally turned off my phone. The next morning, I called Dr. Lin and scheduled an emergency session. "I'm not sure what to do with all this," I told her. "Part of me wants to tell them all to go to hell, but another part misses them," she finished for me. "That's natural, Cassandra. They were your family for 28 years before they abandoned you. It's complicated. What should I do? Should I meet with Jessica, talk to my parents? What do you want to do?" I thought about it for a long moment. I want them to understand what they did to me, how much they hurt me, and I want to look Jessica in the eye when she apologizes. After discussing it further with Dr. Lin and with David, I decided to meet Jessica, but I would not fly back to Boston and risk being ambushed by the entire family. Instead, I suggested a neutral location, a coffee shop near my office in San Francisco. She agreed immediately and booked a flight for the following weekend. Seeing Jessica in person after 6 years was surreal. She looked older, tired, with faint lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. She was thinner than I remembered, almost gaunt, and her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her coffee cup. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, her voice small. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't either," I admitted. There was an awkward silence as we both struggled with where to begin. Finally, she took a deep breath and dove in. "I'm so sorry, Cassandra. What I did to you was unforgivable. You were trying to protect me, and I turned everyone against you." Why? The question had burned in me for 6 years. Why did you believe him over me? We were like sisters, Jess. I would never have hurt you like that. Tears filled her eyes. I was so in love with him, or what I thought was love. And it was easier to believe you were lying than to accept that the man I was about to marry would cheat on me on our wedding day. So I convinced myself you were jealous or confused or, I don't know, I just couldn't face the truth. As she spoke, I felt some of my anger begin to dissipate, replaced by a deep sadness for both of us for all the years we'd lost. "You said you've told the family the truth." She nodded. "Everyone. I called a family meeting and told them everything. About what really happened at the wedding, about all the affairs, about the baby." Her voice caught on the last word. They were shocked, horrified. Mom cried for hours. Dad wanted to drive to Michael's office and confront him. And they believed you, just like that I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. They had no reason not to. Michael had shown his true colors by then. And I think deep down many of them had doubts all along. They just went along with what seemed to be the consensus. That's not exactly comforting, Jess. They chose to believe the worst about me because it was easier than standing up for me. I know. And that's on me too. I was so adamant, so convincing in my accusations. I manipulated them, played on their sympathies. She wiped away tears. They all want to talk to you. Mom and Uncle James have been calling me every day, asking if you've agreed to speak with them. I felt a surge of anger. So now it's convenient for them to believe the truth, now that you've given them permission. It's not like that she protested. They're devastated by what they've done. They miss you terribly. They missed me so much. They didn't bother to investigate whether I might be telling the truth. They missed me so much. They cut me out of their lives without a second thought. She had no answer for that. We sat in silence for several minutes, the noise of the coffee shop continuing around us. Finally, I asked the question that had been on my mind since her first text. "What do you want from me, Jessica? Forgiveness? To go back to the way things were?" She shook her head. I don't expect forgiveness. What I did isn't forgivable. I needed you to know the truth. And I hoped that maybe someday we could find a way to have some kind of relationship again. Not like before. That can't be replaced. But something. As we parted, she handed me a letter. From your parents, she explained. They asked me to give it to you if you were willing to take it. I accepted the envelope but didn't open it. I need time, Jess. This is a lot to process. I understand. Take all the time you need. We're not going anywhere this time. That night, I finally read the letter from my parents. It was long, tear-stained, in places filled with apologies and expressions of regret. We failed you as parents, my father wrote in his precise handwriting. We should have believed our daughter. We should have stood by you no matter what. Not a day has gone by that we haven't regretted our actions. They begged for a chance to apologize in person to begin making amends if I would allow it. Reading their words, I felt the walls I had built around my heart begin to crack. But I wasn't ready to let them crumble completely. Not yet. Over the next few days, I received more calls and messages from family members. My sister Elizabeth left a particularly heart-wrenching voicemail sobbing as she apologized for abandoning me. You were always there for me, she cried. Always. And the one time you needed me, I turned my back on you. I don't know how to live with that, Cass. The vindication I had longed for had finally come, but it brought with it a new pain, a realization of all that had been irretrievably lost. 6 years of family gatherings of support and connection of being part of something larger than myself, those years were gone forever, and no amount of apologies could bring them back. What are you going to do? David asked one evening. A week after my meeting with Jessica, we were sitting on our balcony watching the sunset over the bay, a bottle of wine open between us. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to see them to hear their apologies in person, but another part is afraid. Afraid of what? I took a sip of wine considering the question. Afraid that I'll forgive them too easily. That I'll minimize what they did because it's easier than holding on to the anger. Afraid that once I let them back in, they'll hurt me again. David nodded thoughtfully. Those are valid fears, but is not seeing them at all an option you're considering? Continuing the estrangement, but now on your terms. I've thought about it, I admitted. There's a certain poetic justice in it. They cut me off for 6 years. Now I could do the same to them. But they're still your family, he finished for me. Yes. And despite everything, there are moments when I miss them. Not the people who abandoned me, but the people they were before. The dad who taught me to ride a bike, the mom who stayed up all night with me when I had the flu, the sister who knew all my secrets. In my next session with Dr. Lin, we explored these conflicting feelings further. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, she reminded me. And it doesn't mean things go back to the way they were. You can forgive them for your own peace of mind while still maintaining boundaries. What kind of boundaries? That's for you to decide. Maybe you start with limited contact, just your parents or just your sister. Maybe you make it clear that certain topics are off limits. Maybe you require family therapy as a condition of reconciliation. After several more days of reflection, I made my decision. I would go to Boston and meet with my family. I would hear them out, let them apologize in person. But I would not promise forgiveness, and I would not pretend that the last 6 years hadn't happened. David offered to come with me, but I declined. This is something I need to do on my own, I told him. But thank you for offering. I booked a flight for the following weekend and a room at a hotel rather than staying with family. Then I called my mother and told her I was coming. She cried when I told her, a mixture of relief and apprehension in her voice. We're so looking forward to seeing you, she said. Everyone will be there. Everyone I questioned suddenly anxious. Just immediate family, she assured me. Me and your father, Elizabeth, and Jessica asked if she could come too. Is that okay? I hesitated, then agreed. Yes, that's fine. The flight to Boston was turbulent, matching my emotional state. As the plane descended, I gazed out at the familiar skyline, the city where I'd grown up, where I'd once felt so at home. Now, it felt like foreign territory, a place where I'd experienced the deepest betrayal of my life. My father was waiting at the arrivals gate looking older than I, remembered his hair now completely gray. When he saw me, his face crumpled, and for a moment I thought he might cry. He moved toward me as if to hug me, then stopped, uncertain of his welcome. "It's good to see you, Cassandra," he said formally, as if speaking to a business acquaintance rather than his daughter. "You too, Dad," I replied, equally stiff. The drive to my parents' house was quiet, filled with careful small talk about my flight, the weather, the changes to the city skyline since I'd been gone. Neither of us was ready to breach the wall between us, not yet. When we arrived, my mother was waiting on the porch, pacing nervously. Unlike my father, she did not hesitate. As soon as I stepped out of the car, she rushed forward and enveloped me in a tight hug, sobbing against my shoulder. "My baby," she kept saying. "My baby girl." Despite my resolve to stay emotionally guarded, I found myself returning her embrace, tears springing to my eyes. For a moment, I was not 28, but 8, seeking comfort in my mother's arms after a nightmare. Inside, Elizabeth and Jessica waited, both looking as nervous as I felt. Elizabeth burst into tears the moment she saw me rushing forward to join the hug that my mother had not yet released me from. "I'm so sorry, Cass," she sobbed. "So sorry." Only Jessica held back, standing awkwardly by the fireplace, giving me space. She had already said her piece in San Francisco. Now it was the others' turn. Once the initial, emotional reunion had subsided, we moved to the living room. My father, always the organized one, suggested we each speak in turn without interruption. "Cassandra should go first," he said. "We owe her that much." All eyes turned to me, expectant, fearful. I took a deep breath, trying to organize the thoughts and feelings I'd been rehearsing for days. 6 years ago, I tried to protect Jessica from making what I believed would be a terrible mistake. I told the truth about what I saw, and instead of being believed, I was accused of lying, of trying to seduce my cousins, fiancé, of being jealous and vindictive. And you, all of you, chose to believe those accusations without giving me the benefit of the doubt. My voice grew stronger as I continued. You didn't just disagree with me or question my judgment. You cut me out of your lives completely. Do you have any idea what that was like? To lose my entire family overnight? To be alone during holidays, birthdays? To have no one to call when I got a promotion or when I was sick or scared? My mother was crying silently, my father staring at his hands, Elizabeth looking at me with pain-filled eyes. I pressed on, determined to make them understand. I had to rebuild my entire life from scratch. I moved across the country. I found a new job, made new friends, created a new support system. I went through depression therapy, a broken relationship. And through it all, the one question that kept me up at night was, how could they believe I would do something like that? How could they think so little of me? I told them about the blog, about the community I'd built of others who'd been estranged from their families. The irony is that being abandoned by you forced me to become stronger than I ever thought possible. I found my voice, my purpose. I helped others who were going through what I went through. So in a twisted way, I should thank you. When I finished, the room was silent, except for muffled sobs. Then, one by one, they spoke. My father went first, his voice uncharacteristically shaky. There is no excuse for what we did. As your father, I should have believed you, protected you, stood by you no matter what. Instead, I failed in the most fundamental duty a parent has. I can only say that I was wrong, terribly wrong, and I will regret it for the rest of my life. My mother spoke through tears. I missed you every day, Cassandra. Every single day. But I was too proud, too afraid to admit we might have made a mistake. Even when doubts crept in, even when things didn't quite add up, I couldn't face the possibility that we'd turned our backs on our innocent daughter. What kind of mother does that make me? Elizabeth was the most emotional, barely able to speak through her tears. You were always my protector, my big sister. You stood up for me against bullies, helped me with homework, listened to my boy problems. And when you needed me to stand up for you, I turned my back. I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I am asking for a chance to be your sister again, to try to make up for what I did, even though I know I never really can. Jessica spoke last, reiterating her apology from our meeting in San Francisco, and taking full responsibility for starting the chain of events that led to my estrangement. I was so desperate to believe Michael loved me that I was willing to sacrifice our relationship, your reputation, everything. There are no words for how sorry I am. As they spoke, I felt the anger Id carried for 6 years begin to loosen its grip on my heart. Not disappearing, not entirely, but transforming into something more complex, more nuanced. I saw not monsters who had deliberately hurt me, but flawed humans who had made a terrible mistake and were now drowning in regret. I can't say I forgive you, not completely, not yet, I told them when everyone had spoken, but I am willing to try to build a new relationship, not picking up where we left off because that's impossible. Too much has happened, but something new with clear boundaries and expectations. I laid out my terms, honesty above all else, respect for my life in San Francisco, and understanding that reconciliation would be a process, not an event. And I want family therapy, I added, all of us together. If we're going to rebuild these relationships, we need professional help. To my surprise, they agreed to everything without hesitation. Whatever it takes, my father said, and for once his voice held no hint of his usual stubbornness. Before I left that evening to return to my hotel, Elizabeth pulled me aside. "There's something else you should know," she said quietly. "After Jessica told us the truth, Dad went to Michael. He confronted him, told him what had done to our family was unforgivable." "What did Michael say?" He laughed. "Said it wasn't his problem if we were all stupid enough to believe him over you. So Dad punched him." "Dad." I was incredulous. My father, the dignified accountant who abhorred violence, had punched someone. Elizabeth nodded, a hint of satisfaction in her eyes. "Right in the face. Broke his nose. Said it was worth every penny of the assault charge." Despite everything, I found myself smiling at the image. It didn't undo the pain of the past 6 years, but there was something fitting about my proper rule following father, finally letting his protective instincts override his caution, even if it came 6 years too late. As I left my childhood home that evening, I felt lighter somehow, as if Id set down a burden it'd been carrying for too long. The road to true reconciliation would be long and undoubtedly difficult. There would be setbacks, painful conversations, moments when the old hurt would resurface. But for the first time in 6 years, that road existed. It was no longer a dead end, but a path forward, uncertain and winding though it might be. 1 year after that first difficult meeting in Boston, I stood in the garden of David's parents' house in Napa Valley, surrounded by flowers and fairy lights watching, as our closest friends and family found their seats. It was our wedding day, a smaller affair than Jessica's had been, but exactly what we wanted. My father waited nearby, ready to walk me down the aisle. Our relationship had been rebuilt slowly over the past year, through weekly phone calls, occasional visits, and regular sessions with Dr. Hamlin, the family therapist we'd been seeing. It wasn't the same as before, perhaps it never would be, but it was honest in a way it hadn't been before. We talked about difficult things now, didn't shy away from conflict, or pretend agreement when we disagreed. My mother fussed with my veil, her eyes already damp with tears. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," she whispered. Our relationship had been the quickest to mend, perhaps because mothers and daughters have a way of finding their way back to each other, or perhaps because she had been the first to reach out, the most persistent in her apologies, the most willing to acknowledge the pain shed caused. Elizabeth was my maid of honor, a role that once would have seemed inevitable, but now felt like a deliberate choice, a statement about forgiveness and second chances. Our sisterhood had been reforged through long conversations, shared tears, and a commitment to honesty above comfort. She had moved to Sacramento 4 months ago, close enough to visit regularly, but far enough to maintain our independent lives. Jessica was not a bridesmaid, a boundary I had set and she had respected without question. But she was here seated with her parents, her support over the past year, unwavering but never presumptuous. She had found a good therapist, started a new job, even begun dating again cautiously. We were building a new kind of friendship, one based on mutual respect, rather than shared history. And while it would never be what it once was, it was genuine in a way our previous relationship perhaps hadn't been. As the music began and my father offered his arm, I thought about the journey that had led me to this moment. 6 years of exile, of building a life without the foundation of family I'd always taken for granted. 1 year of careful reconciliation, of setting boundaries, of learning to trust again while protecting my heart. And now a new beginning with a partner who had stood by me through the darkest and the brightest times. The truth had finally come out, as I had always believed it would. But the vindication I'd longed for had not been the simple triumph I'd imagined. Instead, it had been complicated, messy, painful in its own way. The family that had returned to me was not the same one that had abandoned me. They were humbled, more careful with their judgments, more aware of their capacity for error, and I was not the same person they had cast out. I was stronger, more independent, less willing to compromise my truth for the sake of harmony. The greatest lesson I'd learned through this ordeal was not about forgiveness, though, that had been important. It was about self-reliance. I had discovered that I could survive losing what I had once thought essential. I could build a life, a community, a purpose from the ashes of betrayal. That knowledge could never be taken from me, no matter what the future held. I'd also learned that there are different kinds of family. The one we're born into, yes, but also the one we choose. The friends who stand by us when blood relatives fail, who believe us when our truth is inconvenient, who love us not out of obligation but out of choice. Stephanie, Marcus, and Alicia had been that for me, a chosen family that had sustained me when my birth family could not or would not. As I walked down the aisle toward David, I saw both families smiling at me, the one I was born to and the one I had found. They were all part of my story now, the painful chapters and the joyful ones, the betrayal and the reconciliation, the loss and the discovery. I would not change any of it, for it had made me who I was on this day, a woman who knew her own strength, who valued truth above comfort, who understood that love, real love, must include respect, belief, and the courage to stand alone if necessary. After the ceremony, during a quiet moment at the reception, my father found me. I know I said it before, he said, his voice thick with emotion, but I need to say it again. I'm sorry, Cassandra, and I am so proud of the woman you've become, even though I can't take any credit for these last 6 years. Maybe you can, in a way, I replied. Maybe losing you all was what I needed to find myself. He shook his head, tears in his eyes. Don't let me off the hook that easily. I'm not, I assured him, but I am finding peace with what happened. Not because you deserve my forgiveness, but because I deserve to be free of the anger. It's been a heavy load to carry. As the evening wound down, I found myself on the terrace, looking up at the stars, reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. 6 years ago, I'd stood alone at another wedding, watching my life as I knew it crumble around me. Tonight, I stood as a bride surrounded by love, both old and new, with a future bright with promise. The truth had come out, as truth always does eventually. It had not erased the past, but it had opened a door to the future, a future where I was stronger for having been broken, wiser for having been fooled, and more compassionate for having been hurt. To those of you who have experienced family betrayal or estrangement, I want you to know that healing is possible, though it may not look like what you expect. Sometimes reconciliation comes, sometimes it doesn't. But either way, you can build a beautiful life from the pieces of the one that was shattered. You can find strength in your scars and wisdom in your wounds. Have you ever had to forgive someone who deeply betrayed your trust? How did you find the strength to move forward? Share your experiences in the comments below, and do not forget to like and subscribe for more stories about family, relationships, healing, and personal growth. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember that your worth is not determined by those who failed to see it, but by the truth you know in your heart.